Hi, this is Dan Smith again. Used to be the senior pastor of the La Sierra University Church, but just now transitioning over to going to work with evangelism in what is called the Southeastern California Conference. And also be working with Quiet Hour, which is right down the street here from LLBN. So we're going to partner and try to do some exciting things all over Southern California and ultimately still around the world. But I'm still here with Flame of Truth every week, and I hope that you'll stay with me or watch it on the website when you have a chance. Just going to try a message that I gave in my church here a few months ago on a series we called How to Save the Planet. And just to get started, I'll tell a joke or a story that I've told all over the world. Just one of my favorite stories, and that's not really the point of it, but let me put this little spin on it. I can be in Ghana or the Philippines or Thailand or someplace, and I may be an hour away from going to speak in front of 2,000 kids, and I'm nervous, and I need a little joke or a funny story to sort of relax me, relax them, and all of a sudden I'll think of an old joke. So here's one. Two guys are in a bar, they're watching the 11 o'clock news, and a guy is going to jump from a 20-story building. And one of the guys says to the other one, he says, "I'll bet you $20 he doesn't jump." And the other guy says, "Okay, I'll take the bet." The guy jumps. The loser hands over the $20, and the other guy says, "I can't take your money. I saw the 6 o'clock news. I knew he was going to jump." The other guy says, "I watched the 6 o'clock news too, but I didn't think he would do it again." And I'll tell that joke, and in our culture and here in America, everyone will laugh and they get it. You know, you can't make bets upon something you've already seen. But I'll tell that in the Philippines or in Ghana, and it'll just fall flat. They don't know about network news and 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news being exactly the same and the same stories and the same video footage. They don't have the cultural background to make that particular story work. The culture that we know hasn't spread there yet. And so I've been wrestling with this issue. Why doesn't Christianity spread faster? If Jesus and the gospel are so good and so powerful and so exciting and have so radically changed our lives, why is it just spread like wildfire all over the world? Sex spreads everywhere. Everywhere I go, I'll speak at all those colleges and universities all over the world. They put me in a little room and said kids can come and see me, and they confess unbelievable things, all sexual. "I did this. I'm sorry, Pastor. How can I stop?" It's spread everywhere. I've been in little huts in the hills of Thailand, sleeping in the huts with these people, and they don't have television, they don't have education, they don't have cars, or lots of things. But they know about sex. When the lights go down and the sun goes down, they know about sex. Brooke Shields in an old movie called Blue Lagoon, I didn't see it, but I read about it. She and a boy get washed up on an island in the middle of nowhere. They have no books, they have no movies, no novels, no nothing. No parents to tell them about sexuality. But when they hit puberty and become teenagers, they figure it out. Sex spreads everywhere. Alcohol has gone all over the world. Why not Jesus? Why not the gospel? I was back east speaking for something, and we were a thirsty group of us. And the only fast food place in that whole arena was a Starbucks outlet. And someone said, "Dan, let me take you to Starbucks." I'm not a caffeine drinker, never had coffee in my life, just how I grew up. But he said, "You can have decaffeinated coffee." Okay. So they said, "What do you want?" Well, I never know what to order, so he ordered for me. And then he says, "You want espresso?" I didn't know what that was. So he said, "Oh, you'll like this." Okay, so he ordered it all for me. They handed me the drink and a little piece of cardboard. And I said, "What is that?" They laughed at me some more. And the little piece of cardboard that you put around the cup to hold it so it won't burn you when you get the hot coffee. That's how Starbucks has spread. There's a Starbucks all over the world because somebody comes to someone else and says, "You ought to go to Starbucks. This is great. You'll love this." Why hasn't that worked for Christianity? Why isn't everybody saying something? You'll love this. You'll love Jesus. Why doesn't it spread? Tell you a story about a girl. I can't tell you any details about it because I don't want anyone to know who this is. But just a girl that I've known most of her life. Young, let's just say young. Finished school not too long ago. And I was in the town where she was. And we went out to lunch there at the place where I was speaking. And evidently, somehow, she had lost her unique faith in Jesus and Christianity. Not only had she lost her faith in Jesus, she was doing a number of things that her and her family had never believed in or participated in. She had gone to Christian schools all these years, been active in school, a leader in the school. But somehow, just weeks before graduation, she just lost her faith in it. And she said somewhere she had grown up with the idea that people had told her, Jesus is the only way to God. And all of a sudden, she had found people who were wonderful young people, spectacular young people, full of life and caring and serving and doing things for others, who loved God, but didn't believe in Jesus. And she could not compute those two different divergent ideas. And here were people who had much life, but not Jesus. And she had Jesus and didn't have much life. And she converted to another viewpoint. We spent hours together. And I just grieved, and I had to say to her, Jesus says he came to give you life. People who know Jesus have to be more alive than everyone else. I've gone to graduations all over Southern California in the last few months. Not only did I go to our campus where I was at La Sierra University in Loma Linda, but I went to UC Riverside, and I went to Cal Poly in Pomona, and to RCC, our own community college. And there are wonderful, spectacular kids going to all those schools and graduating. Kids I went to see there. Could we claim that the kids at my university and Loma Linda University, our Christian Seventh-day Adventist universities, were more alive, more compassionate, more caring, more spectacular, more bright than anyone else because they knew Jesus? Does Jesus add a value that takes you far above everyone else? Can we defend that or not? I said to this young lady, I said, I don't know that I would have said Jesus is the only way to God. I think I would say Jesus is the best way to God. But does he change people's lives? Are we more alive than everyone else? Maybe you've heard my story that Chuck Colson tells. He was in Singapore going between India and Indonesia. He's there at the airport. I went to high school in Singapore. And evidently he's waiting for a plane. Plane was delayed. They're out in the hot sun waiting for some reason out by the plane. And he told his group that he was with, he said, watch your witness, you know, people are watching. And evidently, so they kept up laughing and having a good time. Even though it was hot, they were frustrated. 2 years later, gets a letter from a Chinese man from Singapore that said, I was with you all at that airport out on the tarmac waiting for the plane to come. I was hot. I was mad at the world. And I watched you, and you guys were alive and happy and fun. Realized you had something I didn't have. I didn't know who you all were, but my kids were going to a Christian school, not because we were Christians, just better education. And I went to the graduation. I happened to see on a shelf there was a copy of a Christian book. Turned it over, saw your picture, recognized you from the airport. I bought the book. I went and bought a Bible. I read my way. I am now a Christian. My whole family's been baptized. All because of what we saw when we saw you at the airport. Is that the way it always is? People with Jesus are more alive, more awake. You've read the book, maybe you heard about the book, I Sold My Soul on eBay. Young Indian young man in Chicago. Got the idea that he would sell his soul, that he would go to any church, anywhere, if people would pay, I think, $10 or something. Someone made a bid for $500. He had to go to church every week for a year and take notes. And I read most of the book. He would go into a church and then analyze how he was greeted in the message and the worship service. But after a year of going to churches, he analyzed the good and the bad, liked many things, still an atheist after a year of going to church. Somehow he didn't find something in all those church services that made him clearly find that Jesus was going to be better than all the alternatives or atheism. The last thing Jesus says before he goes back to heaven is in Matthew 28, 19 and 20. You know the verse. Go and make disciples of all nations everywhere, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And that's what I've been wondering about these weeks and the week that I preached this sermon in my church. Whatever Jesus is talking about, this everything. His last message to the disciples is to say, teach them everything. Don't leave anything out. Don't leave anything on the shelf. Don't forget anything I've told you. Tell them everything. Could it be the reason we aren't better than the rest of the world is that we have not really accepted everything? 80%, fine. 90%. But that 90% has not made us stick out over everyone else. It is the last 10% somewhere. There's a man who just got the world record here a few months ago in the Olympics. And he won it before, and then he won the Olympics. Incredibly fast. But at 90 meters, he's just starting to get ahead. It's the last 10 meters where he explodes past everyone else. They're getting tired. They can't finish. He finishes the race. It's the last 10 meters. It's that everything that might make Christians stick out over the rest of the world. Teresa Avila is a famous writer, Christian, kind of a mystic. She has a famous illustration of the castle that has maybe hundreds of rooms. When someone comes to Jesus, they come into the castle. They get the front door into the castle and they walk in. They are now inside the castle, yes. But after they get into the castle, there is a way you invite Jesus into your castle. Come into my life. Jesus walks in the front door. But then there's hundreds of rooms, Teresa Avila said. And Jesus then begins to go door by door. Says, gotta come into this room. When he comes into a room, he cleans it up and he puts it and he makes it full of life and goodness and fulfillment. And most of us open up many rooms right away to Jesus. 80%, 90%. And Satan lets us have victory after victory. And we quit using those words and we quit doing that and we begin to change. But then all of a sudden, we begin to think, this is easy. I got this down. We come down to the last 10%. Those last few rooms. And then Satan draws a line and says, no more. Not going to let you have the 10%. And we dig it. And we hold on to that 10% of self and life. And we don't go for the everything of Matthew 28. And could it be is that if somehow we would take that last 10%, we would become the Mother Teresas of the world. We would become spectacular people far above the last 10%, the last 10 meters of the race. And we would stick out, just people the most alive, the most spectacular, the most godly. Everything. The last 10%. It's the dessert that we're missing out on. It's not the vegetables and the basic meals, it's the dessert that makes us special. John 10:10, thieves come to take life, I came to give you life, life more abundantly. Last 10%. Jeremiah 29, I have plans for you, not for evil, but for good. Where is it? It's the last 10%. We haven't accepted it. Matthew 19:29, where Jesus says, whatever you've given up for me, I will make it up to you 30-fold, 60-fold, or 100-fold. Where is it? The last 10%. They say the difference between man and gorillas or chimpanzees is 1% of DNA. But look at the difference that 1% would make if we would just accept the everything that Jesus wants to give to us. Everything. Deuteronomy 28, I will make you the head and not the tail. Jesus is saying, I just got resurrected from the dead. I have authority now over the demons and over all the evil in the world. I have resurrection life. If you'll just let me pour my resurrection life into you, you will be alive and you will stick out all over the world. You'll be the head and not the tail, the top and not the bottom. It's the last 10%. But here's what I'm worried about. Instinctively, what do you think of when you think of the last 10%? What does the last 10% you would have to do the everything? What do we think about church standards? Oh, I'm going to have to change movies, or I'm going to have to give up jewelry, or I'm going to have to give up caffeinated drinks, or I'm going to have to give up, some other small thing. I'm going to have to give up jewelry. I'm going to have to change how I keep the Sabbath. I'm going to have to, some lifestyle issue. And we all sense that maybe at the end of the world, just before the close of probation and before all the judgment is wrapped up, we're going to have to make a few final changes. We want to hold that day off as long as we can. We're happy with the 80%, 90%. We've accepted it. It makes sense to us. But we really don't want to do the last 10% because we think it'll be distasteful and we'll have to give up some things we really would rather do. The last 10%. We'll do it when we have to. But how are we going to win that girl that left the church if we try to tell her the last 10% is those things? That's what's kept her from Christ now. We have to show her something else. First, I want to say what Jesus said, that everything that he's ever taught us could be summarized in the two commands, love God and love your neighbor. So the last 10% has to be in there somewhere, loving God and loving your neighbor, because that covers everything. And then I think we can go look at Mark chapter 16, verse 9, which is a parallel verse to Matthew 28, 19 and 20. And there it says, Go into all the world and preach the good news to all creation. So whatever the everything is, that last 10%, it has to be good news. Maybe the reason we haven't gone to the everything is we haven't been convinced that whatever that last 10% is good news. Nothing Jesus commands with us is bad news. It has to be only good news. I went out to eat with a friend of mine the other day. He's in our church, but he's down in Mexico now. He's a painter, painting beautiful paintings. My friend Alfred Lee. We were eating the other day, and it turns out we'd gone to the same high school there in Singapore. And I talked about having played baseball there. He says, I dug up that field that you played on our church headquarters, little small field. He said, I got in trouble. I snuck out and went to a movie. I'm not proud about it. He said, I got in trouble. The school called my father, who's a missionary somewhere, Korea. What should we do? And, well, whatever you want to do. They said, made me dig up that whole field. I didn't go home for the whole summer. I didn't get to see my parents. I had to stay there in the dorm by myself and dig up that whole field. I killed cobra snakes' eyes, hot and miserable. I had to dig up that field. I hated the church. I hated the school. I hated all of it while I was out there digging in the dirt. How do we make that last 10% good news and not bad news just for watching a movie? Good news. And it says here in this passage, some doubted. Some people worship Jesus, but some doubted. Where did they doubt? Evidently, it was possible to be right there in the face of Jesus, in the presence of the most incredible being that's ever been in the world, and doubt whether this is really God. Doubt whether Jesus is going to change your life. Doubt whether God is going to make your life better or not. Doubt. And there are people sitting in church all around the world who doubt whether Jesus can really give them the most spectacular, the most alive quality of life there is. Ultimately, it comes down to your picture of God. If you went for everything, would he make your life better and richer or not? Seeing God at his very best. I have preached all over the world a sermon on seeing God at his very best. I'm going to give a quick summary of it. If you've been watching every week, you may have heard some of this before. But just to finish this message up, let me talk about seeing God at his very best. I spent most of my life trying to see God at his very best. I didn't want to take anything that was an approximation or a compromise of the picture of God. I know we're going to study God throughout eternity and we will see him face to face. But what is the best we can see of God today? Some would say we would see God at his very best at creation. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. God just throwing out words, and all of a sudden, there is a universe. And I've told the old joke about Sherlock Holmes and David Watson lying out under the stars. Sherlock Holmes asked Dr. Watson, he said, what do you see? Well, I see stars. What do they mean? Oh, they mean that we are small. There are millions of galaxies and planets out there, and we are small. And it means we're going to have a good day tomorrow, and God is great and magnificent. What does it tell you, Dr. Holmes? Dr. Holmes tells me somebody stole our tent if we can see the stars. The stars and all of the universe tells us there is a great God, and he is powerful and wise and caring and magnificent. Whatever you believe on the continuum between creation and evolution, all of us who are in some form creationists believe that is God at His very best, speaking and making the universe as it is. No, though I heard this first sermon, Pastor Hill, he said, that's not God at His very best yet. It's when He made man, not animals and trees and stars. It's man made in His own image, able to relate to God of the universe. That is God at His very best. You think about all the athletes and the smart people, the human genome people who have mapped out the genome and can go to the moon or go down to the bottom of the ocean. That's God at His very best. No, not yet. Maybe you would say it's the miracles. It's axe heads floating to the top of the water and Red Sea opening up and changing water to wine and all the other miracles in the Bible. When God steps into our world, that is God at His very best. Read a wonderful little story this week from the Philippines. I was in this city just a few months ago, Baguio, way up in the north, up in the highlands of Philippines. And these missionaries, Willis Hackett, old missionary in our church years ago. And evidently they were walking along and a little girl came up, pulled on his coattail and wanted, I think, 5 centavos. It's almost nothing today. It may have been a little bit back then. And so, he gave her 10 centavo piece. See what would happen. Few minutes later, his wife said to him, "You're a soft touch. She's going to come back and get you for more." Here came the little girl. Pulled on his coat. "How are you?" "You gave me 10 centavos." And so she had brought 5 centavos back. Couldn't believe a little girl could be so honest. "How's your family?" "Well," she led them to her parents, crawled up into this little hut, and here was the father hacking with tuberculosis, mother, a number of kids. She was sick, holding a little baby. They were starving, had almost, how much food do you have? 1 cup full of rice. They took that family down, got them some food, got them some clothes, took them to our Dorcas Community Service Center at that time. Our people got involved, got them situated. He forgot all about the story. A few months later, a few years later, I think, he was speaking at our college, which I have preached at this year, outside Manila. And he got up and he told a story about this girl. Her name was Feely. There was a little rustling in the back. They came up at the end of his sermon and he said, "Here's the girl. She had grown up and, here she was. She was at our college." They went down after the meeting was over and got to know her. "How was your family?" "All well." They had prayed for that father with tuberculosis. He was healed. The family was well. They were all baptized Christian Seventh-day Adventists today. And here she was, bright and lovely, going to our school. It was a miracle. These stories where God steps in and does something spectacular in someone's life. That is God at His very best. No, we would say, that's not God at His very best. It's Jesus on the cross. When Jesus comes down and dies, God Himself comes down. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son and dies on a cross. That is God at His very best, dying on a cross for us. Well, you would have to say, yes, that's the heart of the gospel. But ultimately the question is, what do you believe about the cross? That's the question. God at His very best. Have we given God, the world, the best story of the cross? I have a little story I've told many times about Rwanda, 94, Christians killing Christians in the fratricide they had there. 1 million people died in 100 days. A group of people were sitting in church when some of the military came in, one side, made everyone lie down, saw a picture of Jesus, said, "If you don't go over to the cross, picture of Jesus on the cross, spit on Him and say, 'Jesus, you are useless. I want nothing more to do with you. You're going to die today.'" Pastor went over, didn't want to die, spat on the picture, "Jesus, you are useless. I want nothing more to do with you." Sat down, 7 or 8 more people. Finally, one girl went over, took her skirt, wiped all the spit off and said, "Jesus, I am the one who is useless. You are the most important person in the universe to me." Sergeant began to cry. "I can't kill you." Willing to die for Jesus. Spectacular girls, alive. But outside that church, Christians were killing Christians. People who believe in the cross were killing other Christians. It's not enough to believe in the cross. It's what you believe about the cross. At the cross was Jesus dying to somehow satisfy God A God who demands that if you don't give blood, He won't forgive you. You won't be good enough for Him. But rather than you dying in your blood, He waits for Jesus to die. And when He sees the blood of Jesus, then He's willing to change His mind from no to yes. Not God at His best. When Jesus says, I want to teach them everything, He means to teach them the best. The best understanding of the cross, the best understanding of the gospel, the best picture of how to live a godly life, the best. We need that last 10% to get it right. When people see God at His very best, then the gospel will spread like wildfire all over the world, and we will save the planet for God. Well, maybe you would go on down to forgiveness. Maybe it is forgiveness that God is at His very best. When Jesus takes the gospel and He forgives us. No, not yet. I'm going to just say it is saving lost souls. God was at His very best in my life when He came into my life, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 18 years old. And I gave my life to Jesus, and He came into my life. God is at His very best when He takes what happened on the cross, and He comes in and saves one lost person and changes that person's life. What's the point? If you want to see God at His very best, get involved in telling people the incredible everything that Jesus is. The last 10%, God is like this. The cross is like this. I have a lady in my church told me this story. She knew I was working with this college down in Africa. She said, Pastor Dan, 40 years ago, a group of mothers and I got some money together and we sent it for one young man down there in Africa. 20 years later, I was in France speaking at a place. A young man came up to me and he said, I am from Burundi. I went to that college in Africa. Some ladies helped me go. She says, I was one of those ladies. The difference you can make in life when you give something from your heart and when you tell people what God is really like. That's the best. God at His best.